Hello to you. Well, we all suspected diplomats were a lot less diplomatic in private. We all know now the United States is prone to bugging allies and enemies alike. Interesting turn of events then for two top American officials to be caught in an apparently bugged conversation, bad-mouthing the European Union and being very frank indeed about senior opposition figures in the Ukraine. The US State Department has not challenged the authenticity of the recording. This from our North American editor, Mark Mardell.
The storm is still brewing. Behind the bravado, the banging of batons, a profound tussle whether Ukraine faces east or west, whether it does its deals with Russia or Europe. Protesters marched proclaiming, "We are tired of waiting." They are not the only ones who are frustrated. So apparently is America, dismissive of the European Union's handling of this crisis. The US Ambassador and the Assistant Secretary of State Victoria Nuland have worked arm in arm, just how closely revealed in a conversation posted anonymously on YouTube. It reveals them plotting who should and shouldn't be in a new Ukrainian government. But this is the surprise.
So that would be great, I think, to help glue this thing and have the UN help glue it and, the EU.
After dismissing the EU with that curse, this on the Russians.
No, exactly. And I think we've got to do something to make it stick together, because you can be pretty sure that if it does start to gain altitude, the Russians will be working behind the scenes to try to torpedo it.
As the ambassador tweeted a picture of Victoria Nuland with opposition leaders, the White House seemed a bit embarrassed.
I would say that
it's not private
since
anymore.
the video was first noted and tweeted out by the Russian government, I think it says something about Russia's role, but the content of the conversation is not something I'm going to comment on.
An awkward handshake between Victoria Nuland and Ukraine's hardline president after suffering months of revelations that it spied on its friends. Some will delight that American frankness has now been caught on tape, but one former diplomat says it'll blow over.
The United States is able to act much more quickly in a crisis than the EU is able to act. Certainly EU and American interests in Ukraine are very similar, and both sides understand that. So from time to time, Washington becomes impatient with the length of time it takes the EU to act.
Being caught scornfully swearing about your allies is, well, humiliating. But the real revelation is the depth of America's involvement in this crisis. It's not the Cold War, but it is an important struggle. Mark Mardell, BBC News, Washington.
Well, watching these developments in the US is Dr. Geoffrey Pyatt, Assistant Professor on the Security and Intelligence Studies Program at King University in Virginia. Welcome. Thanks very much for your time. So this apparently is the top American diplomat on Europe, bad-mouthing Europe and the people she's working with in Ukraine. Oh, dear.
Very embarrassing. My phone started ringing off the hook as soon as it happened.
Why do you think we are hearing this at all? This is apparently a private conversation.
It appears to me, first of all, that Russia must be the obvious culprit behind this. It appears to me that in connection with the Snowden revelations, perhaps Moscow is trying a very different form of intelligence/diplomacy, where it's trying to basically reach the average person in the street through unofficial channels.
And it did appear first, I know, the first anyone heard of it as far as I know, was on Twitter in a tweet from a Russian diplomat. So do you think the aim is in some way to help fracture the Western alliance on Ukraine?
There isn't a Western alliance of Ukraine. The interests of the European Union, Western Europe, and America coincide when it comes to Ukraine. And so it is to the interest of Russia to have that alliance fractured in any way possible.
And do you think it's likely to have that sort of effect?
I think not by itself. I think by itself, it's a momentary crisis of embarrassment that will be probably overcome very quickly. But in connection to the wider damaged relations between between Washington and the EU after the Snowden revelations, this could have a snowball effect and create a crisis that we haven't seen in several years.
Technically, how was it done, do you think?
Diplomats are supposed to know that their communications, both private and professional, are monitored at all times. In the least, what this is unprofessional carelessness on behalf of both diplomats involved in this. They're supposed to know better than to speak so frankly on the phone like that.
Dr. Fitsanakis, thank you very much indeed.